Hey, I'm Nick DeMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre, the interview edition. For those of you who don't know what Music is Not a Genre is, each week I take an album or a single or just a musical concept and I discuss it at length. I give you my take on it. I throw in some facts, some interesting information, probably some opinions, bust some myths, and give some history, and I connect it to my music, and other things in the world. This here is the spin-off edition of that, which is the interview edition. This is the third interview in the series. Thank you, first of all, to everyone who subscribes, who clicks and shares and watches and listens, and especially if you are a Patreon supporter, I very much appreciate that. And let's get right to it. Today's guest is just like all the guests, a very special guest, but this is a very special guest. His name is Nicky DeMatteo. He is a singer, piano man, actor, and an 8th Dan black belt. I can't say enough about the things he's done and the career he's had. So instead of me just extending this introduction, I'm going to hand it right over. How are you?
I'm fine, buddy. Yeah. We just got over COVID and we're feeling good, both of us.
That's right. Yeah, you had a case of COVID, and your partner did as well.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad to see both of you are doing well. So before we go any further, just so we can clear up any confusion that the audience might have right now, how do we know each other?
Yeah, we met on November the 28th, 1968.
Wow.
Which, interestingly enough, is the day you were born.
Oh, okay. I see.
At the St. Agnes Hospital in South Philadelphia, which ironically saved my life back in the mid-40s. But that's another story. So we've known each other. Oh, gee, I already gave away your age. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, man.
68.
Deal, you know. Well, it's too late now. You can't take it back. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, we're going to keep that in. We're not editing anything, Jimmy. I don't know who Jimmy is. So, yes, that's right. So this is my dad here. And this is, this is the interview that I've been waiting for. And I bet that you all have been waiting for as well. I have no idea how long this thing's going to go. All I can say is we're going to get into a lot of stuff. And it couldn't be more of a pleasure to just kind of sit and talk like this. Not that we don't do it over the phone and such, but circumstances being what they are, we haven't really seen each other in a while. And this gives us a chance to, I don't know, catch up in public, I guess.
That's true. Say. This is a little more formal than, talking face to face or on the phone. It has a formality to it, but a casual, relaxed formality. How about that?
That's what we want. That's right. So why don't, here's a question. Why don't you, as our cat chimes in, why don't you tell everyone your story? You can start wherever you want to start and throw in whatever you want to throw in, as much as you want to do. I would love to hear it. And if there's something you don't cover that I know about, I will mention it anyway.
Reminds me of a Cole Porter song. My story is much too sad to be told. That is absolutely untrue.
Well, that's a good start.
Yeah, my story, thank God, is not sad. And so I can tell it.
Awesome.
Born in South Philadelphia, or as we say, South Philly. Yeah, way back in 1941. You know how people grow up, and you're growing up, you're a kid, you're wondering what you're going to be in life. There was never any question among all my family, and eventually myself, as to what I would be doing. And that is singing. Plain and simple. Interesting. I said that St. Agnes saved my life. The hospital in the mid-40s, I contracted double pneumonia and pleurisy. They pretty much gave up on me. They told my folks to get ready to make arrangements and so forth. And then they came back to mom and dad and said, we have something that's been used in the military and it's been used successfully. We'd like to try it on little Nicky. It was penicillin, which saved my life. Okay. But when I was 2.5, I was I'm telling you because I'm relating what I've been told. They came to see me in the St. Agnes Hospital, my family, mom and dad, sisters, and the nuns stopped the family from going into the children's ward. They said, "Don't go in just yet. Nicky is standing up in his crib singing to the other kids." And I believe the song was, "Mares he dotes and dozy dotes and little lambs eat ivy. A kid'll eat ivy too." Big hit back then. But it became, it was just an understood thing that that's who I was and that's what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. So I feel truly blessed to be doing and to have done, as it were, what I was supposed to do.
This is the beginning of a very long and fascinating story and life in music and life in
Yeah.
general. And I hope we get to as much of it as possible. But before we go any further, there's a question I've always wondered if you have the answer to, which is, so you have this origin story of you were 2.5, you said, is that right?
Yeah.
And you got sick, you got better, and the new miracle drug, and you wake up and you're singing. Did anybody ever tell you, because you would have been too young to remember, were you singing before you got sick? Were you always singing when you were a baby? Was there something in your life, in your family, that would have influenced you to have such a connection to music so early?
They did, in fact, tell me that I was learning songs before I was 2 years old. Just um, listening to some crank up recording machine we had in the basement and just learning songs. I don't remember naturally, but I have no reason not to believe what they tell me.
Well, and it makes perfect sense. So, kids hear different things when they're, well, the kids hear everything, but kids kind of attach themselves to different things as they're growing up. And for some, it's immediately language. And, for others, it takes a while for that kind of thing to develop. But yeah, for some, it's music. So it sounds like you had kind of a natural ear and affinity for it from before, you could barely speak.
Bingo. Absolutely. Bingo. No question about it. In my
Now,
mind or anybody else's. Good.
yeah, no. So then, I guess, then what happened? Did your family, your mother or your father, your sisters, whoever they were, whichever, who decided after you got better and started singing, who and at what point did they decide that we're going to take this kid and start to give him more opportunities to sing, or groom him, or allow him to sing? I'm not even sure how it happened, but clearly there, like you said, there was never a point where you didn't know you wanted to do music. But at that early of an age, how did it go from just a kid who loves singing and can learn songs easily into like a burgeoning, very early career?
Yeah. By the way, Aunt Dolly and Aunt Sarah send their love to you. I just want you to know that.
Well, tell them I said the
Okay.
same back.
But speaking of Aunt Dolly and Aunt Sarah, when I was in the second grade, I was in school, and they came to get me out of school because traveling, like a door-to-door salesman had come to the door and said, "Is there anybody in this family that sings?" And they came and got me. I came to, and I sang for the guy apparently, and he said, "Okay, fine." And they enrolled me in a course called the Dale Dance Studios in Philadelphia on Chestnut Street in the Presser Building. And I started taking voice lessons at about the age of 7 with Marie Whartonby. Stayed with her for about 10 years. Wonderful, wonderful woman who concentrated on two things primarily as a singer: breathing and diction. Breathing so people can hear you, and diction so they can understand you.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
I started taking lessons then, and that's it. And that was around 1948 or so. In 51, I auditioned for a local television show called the Horn and Hardart Children's Hour. It was live television every Sunday about 11:30 on WCAU Channel 10. And I was on that show for 5 years. I became kind of a big man on campus in South Philly or in Philadelphia, generally speaking. Um, on television every week, you become popular. Uh, Recently, we ran into some of the guys from the Danny and the Juniors, a big Philadelphia group that had a couple of super hits back then. And one of them, Joe Maffei, told me that I was an inspiration to him from seeing me on the Children's Hour. Uh, and also, Chubby Chubby Checker said the same thing pretty much. God bless. I don't mean to be tooting my own horn. I'm just saying what he told me. Chubby recently told me that he was being interviewed in Cleveland, and the interviewer asked him about some of his influences in becoming a singer. And he told me, he said, Nicky, I gave you as one of my influences. I felt extremely flattered about that. But again, the Children's Hour, 5 years, and then uh, I sang with a band, a gentleman who named Johnny Austin from Collingswood, New Jersey, real name Johnny D'Agostino, was the hot trumpet player with the Glenn Miller Orchestra back in the late 30s. He started his own band in the Philadelphia area. I started singing with Johnny back around 55. I was like 13 or so, and I was making $5 a night in 1955, 56, 57. And that, I mean, to a guy going to Bartlett Junior High, in junior high school, $5 a night, man, that was cool. I was singing, doing what I love to do. And that's, it started from there and it just burgeoned. Then the Arthur Godfrey show in 1957. That's another story.
Well, yeah, so that's perfect segue because your manager, better known as Mom, sent a bunch of notes and mentioned that. So let me get us up to there.
Okay, go ahead.
We talked about your early development, and I know there's actually a recording of you from when you were 10 years old singing Ave Maria, and that's online for people who want to check it out. I think I'll include that link. But then 51 to 56, it's the Children's Hour, and it stands to reason that at that time, I mean, anytime really, but at that time in Philadelphia, when rock and roll wasn't really even a word that was used yet, and it was kind of proto and just developing, and doo-wop and all of that, that people of a similar age, kids in particular, would look at another kid who really, what you did was you started earlier and had the chops earlier than they might have. So what, by the time they became teens, they were like, oh, there's this kid that we know. It makes sense that you would be an inspiration based on the timing of all that and your skill.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened from the Children's Hour. Again, you couldn't get exposure like that. I mean, first of all, let's face it, back then, how many channels were there around, Philadelphia? 3, 6, 7 tops?
Yeah.
Back then, I think there was only 3. And so TV was, what you could watch was rather limited at the time. So, and there it was. The Children's Hour was comparable, to, what can I say? On a local level, it was comparable to, say, American Idol or America's Got Talent, these great shows that came out recently that feature talented people. And that's what it was back then. The Arthur Godfrey show, you mentioned my manager, Tony Mambo was his nickname. He actually was best man at our wedding, and he's your godfather. He suggested I lie about my age for 1 year. You could not be on the Arthur Godfrey show unless you were 16. I
God.
was 15 and said I was 16.
So now you taking off on that, you did the Children's Hour for 5 years. Is that how Arthur Godfrey discovered you?
No, it was Tony's idea to go on the show. That it was called the Talent Scouts, and they'd have like regular people who were the talent scout. And Tony's friend from his work, uh, Peggy was her name, I believe, and she became my talent scout. Where Arthur Godfrey will interview the talent scout for a few minutes, and the talent scout will explain where they heard me and how and what they were impressed with, and then they introduced me. I was one of three acts on that Monday night show back in January of '57, and one of them was a hula dancer, and the other act was a man and woman who sang semi-classical music. Um, and they decided the winner with an applause meter. When it came time at the end of the show, the hula dancer, there were a contingent of sailors in the audience. Boom, the needle went all the way over for her. And when it came my turn, the needle went almost as far. And Arthur Godfrey said, "You know what? I'm going to tie these two up." Well, he was like the Oprah of his time. Powerful, powerful man. And he decided to make me a co-winner. And
How long had he been doing the show by the time you got on?
I believe it was originally on radio,
Mhm.
and then went into television. By the time '57 rolled around, he was so popular that his word was amazing. Just he could sell a product. In fact, I remember Lipton tea was one of his sponsors. He could
Oh.
just sell a product by mentioning something.
And then when he stopped doing the show?
No, I don't. I would suspect it was in the '60s at some
60s,
point.
yeah.
Yeah, early '60s.
But it's always been interesting to me that, when I was younger, I never thought, I don't think I put two and two together, but there was a show back then, hosted by Ed McMahon, called Star Search. And
Oh my gracious.
that
Yeah.
was a very similar kind of thing, where it was audience-based judges, things like that, that would determine who would be the winner. So for people who are younger watching this, who think that things like America's Got Talent, The Voice, these brand new ideas, they've been around for decades and decades. Possibly even before Arthur
Yeah,
Godfrey.
possibly before, right.
And so then you did. How long were you on that show? Was it just 57?
Yeah, what happened was when you won on the Talent Scout night, which was a Monday night,
Okay.
you automatically get to appear on his televised morning show, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, for that week. And I sang 2 songs a day, made $800 for the week. Now imagine, this little kid from South Philly making $800 a week singing. Now, what happened was Godfrey was going to put me on his Wednesday night show, which was powerful, a 1-hour variety show. And before he did that, he went off to Lake Placid the following week with his whole show. When he came back from Lake Placid, he called me again, and I was on a second week. And then at some point, somebody from Philadelphia called the Arthur Godfrey people and told them that I was not 16, I was 15. The person probably didn't realize he or she was doing me the best favor that could have happened. I wound up meeting your mother. Oh, by the way, I'm looking at your face right now, and you resemble your maternal grandfather. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's another story. Anyway, that's Arthur Godfrey, and it was a great experience. This Tony Mambo, who was my family friend manager quote at the time, suggested, and this is something I suggest to people who want to be singers. He suggested to my family he should take piano lessons. And
Then
yes.
what 57?
Oh no, it was earlier than 57, it was 55.
Okay.
I was 13, and I started taking lessons with a guy from Philly, Lee Mesa, studied with him for 1 year. Tony drove me to North Broad Street in Philadelphia every Monday for a year. I finally found Joe Cavalieri in South Philly, one of the great piano teachers, and I went to him for 5 more years. And piano, I suggest to singers, you want to be a singer, take piano lessons. Now, it's not absolutely necessary because the voice is a wonderful instrument in and of itself. But the piano lessons for me made the difference between being able to make a living at it on a steady basis, just as you well know, for 50 years or so, playing all kinds of lounges and clubs and restaurants and so forth, and met a lot of wonderful people, and just feel that singing has been my connection to the spiritual. God said, you're going to be a singer, and your singing is going to help to bring people closer to me. Okay, if you say so, I believe you. I'm just going to go with it.
Wow, you're as has been happening with these interviews, which is just thrilling to me. You recite a passage, what you just said, and like 10 things pop off in my head that I want to talk about. Some of which we might get to. But the first thing that popped into my head is when you post these videos online, one of the things you do is make it easier for people to search for them, to find something that they like. And in order to do that, you do something called tags. So you would say in the tag section, you'd say Nicky DeMatteo, you'd say singer, you'd maybe say Philadelphia. There's a limited amount of space for these tags. There's no possible way I'm going to be able to include everything you're mentioning. And we're only 20 some minutes in. So, this is just the beginning, folks. That's all I'm saying, right?
This goes to show you, pal, you live long enough.
Well,
and
right?
And you're worth a lot of tags.
There you go. Hey, that should be on a shirt. So one of the things I wanted to go back to, though, is you mentioned a couple of things like getting knocked off of Arthur Godfrey, Tony telling you to take piano lessons, and then how that affected you in later on. What the viewers, listeners don't know, that I do know, is that the things you're talking about and the way it affected you happened years later. There were other things that happened in between. And to me, it's this interesting idea of seeds being planted or an event happening that sets off another chain of events that if that event hadn't happened, other things wouldn't have happened. And that looking back, you can see how it creates this kind of timeline and trajectory for a person's career and life.
Wow. Beautifully put. Well, I never wanted to use the piano as a means to make a living. Are you kidding? I told your mother she wanted me to play the piano. No, I'm a singer. Singers don't play the piano. I'm a stand-up. That's what I did. I stand up singing nightclubs and so forth from around 1955 through 70, really. 1970. You weren't quite two yet. And so I didn't want to play the piano as a means to make a living. But again, hindsight is 20/20, and I realized in hindsight that I was a stupid, self-centered person. But that's another story.
I think anyone over a certain age, you hope that they say that, because I think at some point, whether it's in your teen years or beyond, we all feel that way, with self-centered and learning the lessons of life, that connection to others and compassion and care for others is really what makes all of this worth it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Connection. That's what you and Catherine were talking about in your interview. That wonderful idea of connection. We sometimes take that for granted in life, really, and we shouldn't. It's just this beautiful thing coming from deep inside us, going to the people deep inside them, and bringing that. Well, anyway, I don't want, at the risk of getting.
No, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it connects to the. I think the last thing I wanted to touch on, and the things that you said, is that you believe like music creates some kind of a spiritual presence, a connection, and all of that.
No question about it.
And there's a sense to me that any art or any type of experience that transcends just its actual instance, whether it's the instance in time or a recording or something like that, that has life beyond that, is to me, it connects to so many other things in the world just by default. And if that thing also has kind of a transcendence in the way that it's done, through the experience of it, or the talent of it, or the coincidence of time that it occurs in, and how it's connected to things that are going on in the world, then that multiplies the connection exponentially. And so what you've done, starting with, like you said, fairly famous people, which we are going to get into later on in this interview, with Chubby Checker and some of your other friends back there, and the guy from Danny and the Juniors, was start this kind of chain of influence and connection through just doing something that you loved, you were born to do, and became, through hard work, very good at.
Man, are you a philosopher as well? Boy, that's beautiful.
Yes, that's why I don't make any money at this. Philosophers. But so this is great. This gets us up to a period 55 to 70 that has been, I think, for my life, the most fascinating part in many ways of your history. And that is, you were, as you term it, a stand-up singer. And I'll let you describe what that is. And that carried you through not just various bands and people you perform with, but even various styles of music. And I want to hear as much as possible about that. Where did it start? The stand-up singing.
Back in the 40s, late 40s. For me, I was part of a group of young people at the St. Martha's House in South Philadelphia, and Fort Dix Army base in New Jersey would send Army trucks to St. Martha's House to pick up the young people and take them to Fort Dix and do a USO show. So I was doing USO shows back in the late 40s. Started working nightclubs in around 55, and as a stand-up singer. And it was Tony Mambo whose influence, he loved Frank Sinatra. At the time, my influence was my sister Sarah and Dolly. They loved Perry Como. In fact, on the Children's Hour, they referred to me as the young Perry Como. But I realized that Sinatra, with his phrasing, had an appeal to jazz people as well. And so I became a Sinatra-phile as well. And the influence there is palpable, no question about it. But I love all styles, although I'm not that much into rap. But I guess that would, that would be understandable at my age.
Well, so those of you listening in, you heard a little voice in the background. It's my mother, who at some point may, say hi. But it's interesting. Like I said, this has always been interesting to me. But it makes sense that those would be some primary influences for you, based on the recordings that I've heard of you from that period. And we're talking at the age of 15, sounding like a full-grown man, vocally, just absolutely incredible. Which then, so I guess, would you say most of what you sang professionally was in that kind of jazz standard popular style for that period?
Great American Songbook, as we have come to refer to it. The great composers, Cole Porter, George Gershwin, and Ira Gershwin, and so forth. Yeah, no question. Those kinds of songs became, in a sense, the basis for my singing clubs. And stand-up singing, for those of you who might, it just means going out on the stage, not playing an instrument, just being a singer, being backed up by a house band. You have arrangements for the band, and you're backed up by them. And that's what I did for all those years until the spring of 1970.
Now that, there's a lot that happened in between there
Sure.
that, of course. And one of the things that's always been interesting to me that I've never quite really asked you about or gotten an answer for is that, so you had your, live performances, and some of them were captured on TV or, through some type of recording. But then it's true then that your debut album was 1960? Was that your debut album?
61.
61. And was that your debut
was-
recording, or did you do recordings before that?
Oh, right. Okay. Right back to the Arthur Godfrey thing, 57. I started making records professionally around 57. But remembering that Mrs. Whartonby, my singer, my singing teacher, was adamant about me not singing rock and roll. I have to say that it was kind of a mistake at that point for her to say that, because it took me out of that teen thing where it took me years to learn how to sing rock and roll, to unlearn what I learned in voice lessons. I'll tell you another story about that later, about Frankie Avalon and so forth. But
We'll get there. Yeah.
yeah, it took me years to not use the voice, the impossible dream voice, as it were, to sing every song. That, if I'm doing, you took a fine time to leave me, Lucille. Not, you can't sing that. You have to. Look, I'm going to go down and say that, as far as I'm concerned, rock and roll 100 years from now is going to be classified as folk music. It's music from the folk. Frankie once asked me who my voice teacher was because of the Arthur Godfrey show, because of things happening. No, it was impossible. You don't need my voice teacher. Sing, just let it come out of you. And that's what he did, and among other people. But
Well,
yeah,
you talk about I mean, every era in the world is, in history is transitional, but you talk about a period in history musically that was especially transitional, because even though a lot of things did morph and change and fall in and out of popularity at the beginning of, the first half of the 20th century, that shift didn't seem as seismic until, rock and roll
absolutely.
started to trickle in and take over the kind of jazz standards and what we now would call like vocal music. And so you're at this watershed moment where these two things are crossing over in some ways and conflicting. And so it makes sense to me that both in terms of philosophy, like your voice teacher, or in style, like in the way you sing, that there would be a lot of conflict and question as to which direction somebody's going to go. And it reminds me of the late 70s, as a matter of fact, where you were talking about a time where rock had become an established thing. And then, like you said, with rock and roll, it was like, you didn't need voice lessons. You had a way of singing, you just sang it. It's a different type of vocal production. In the late 70s, punk comes along, and everybody's saying, the old rock people are saying, that's not music, that's just people screaming, right? And at the same time, rap and hip hop come along, and they're saying, well, that's not music, that's just people talking over a beat, and yet these are, again, different modes of using your voice expressively to convey lyrics, and which allows music to grow in a way that adds different lyrical content, different vocal content, different productions, and things like that. And in the late 50s, this was one of those periods where, for better or worse, and your claim is for worse, you were compelled to hang on to kind of the old way of thinking, even though some of your friends and colleagues of your age in South Philly were already starting down the road to rock and roll.
Absolutely. When I mentioned that Frankie Avalon asked me who my voice teacher was. Now Frankie and I were on the children's hour together back in the early 50s, and he was a trumpet player at the time, and he said Bobby Marcucci, who was Frankie's manager, wants me to be a singer. Now, I gave him my voice teacher's name, but the irony of it, he asked me that question around 1957. 2 years later, Frankie is a superstar with Venus. Hey, Venus, oh, Venus. #1 hit for him. I'm in a recording studio in New York City. Big band. The Ray Charles singers, not Ray Charles, the what I say Ray Charles, but the Ray Charles singers from the Perry Como show. In the recording studio. I'm in a booth with earphones, and I'm singing a song, and the guy in the recording booth stops the music. It says, Nicky, just to me, he's talking just to me now. I don't know how to tell you this, but you're singing too good. I want you to just clip your lyrics. Don't hold your notes. Try to sound a little more like Frankie Avalon. And therein lies the irony.
Which song was this you said you were singing?
A song called Suddenly. It was the only song I ever recorded that hit the top 100 in the country. It didn't go real high or anything, but very high. But it was the only one. He was absolutely right. As I said, it's folk music. It took me years to unlearn it. By 1970, I started playing and singing to make a living. And then I began doing it all. Rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what helped me to be able to do what I did in clubs all those years.
Well, you bring up a few things. First of all, for those of you who don't know, some of the people that you kind of hung out with back in the day, Frankie Avalon was one of them. Chubby Checker, like you mentioned,
Sure.
Fabian, Bobby Rydell,
Right.
all people from Philly, many of whom, including so many of these damn people were Italian. Like what's up? Jeez. Like cockroaches. But what's interesting to me there is here you are, and you have this history of singing for big bands and such like that, and your debut full album comes out in '61, Blame It on My Youth, standards, just so dynamically produced. It's just a great album. If anybody who wants to go look, Blame It on My Youth, Nicky DeMatteo. Suddenly came out in 60 or 61?
Late 59.
It came out in late 59.
Yeah.
And according to things I've seen on the internet, it charted in 60 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, because of Suddenly, I got a rock and roll tour out of it.
Well, so here you go.
Yeah, right.
You, despite whatever anybody said, you record this song that was also recorded by Petula Clark. Look that up. I prefer his version, of course. But
you recorded it too.
Oh yeah, and I recently on my Band Rex latest album, I did a cover of Suddenly, on which you
I love it.
does some backup vocals as well and a little bit of lead in there.
Yeah.
And so you like this conflict is right there in real time where you're still planning to do this full album of standards, but prior to that, you have the biggest single of your career, which is a clear kind of, not first wave of rock and roll, but kind of that second wave of rock and roll that came in with people like, Frankie Avalon.
Sure.
and
Teen Idols.
Yeah. In the Teen Idols. And that is such an interesting crossover. And so what I didn't know then is that from that, that was the song that got you on the rock and roll tours.
Right.
Did you continue to do both kinds of music?
Yes.
Okay.
No question. In fact, the year later, 61 is when I matriculated. How about that word? at LaSalle College in Philadelphia. I was there for 5 years. But I recorded an old Victimone standard called I Have But One Heart. In Italian, it's Vicino Mare. Anyway, I'd recorded it in the style of Suddenly. And that song was a local hit in Philadelphia,
I know that. Yeah.
61. And it got me some important club work in Philadelphia, Sciola's, uh, that in one of the better clubs in the Philadelphia area. And it's so, yeah, it's kind of like an irony. Yeah, I'm recording, and I'm not. It's almost non-singing. Don't sing it. Just kind of like almost speak it. Again, don't hold your notes. Don't use vibrato. Don't. I'm sorry. What was that?
Oh, that's an angel got its wings. You can
I
continue.
got it. Yeah. Love that movie.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, the tangents we could go on are so numerous, like you said.
Well, so I didn't know that was like, so that was like your follow-up single then.
It was.
One
Yeah,
Heart.
it did not hit any national charts at all.
Did it feel now? So no one may know this, but I have had some classical training, both in voice and piano, and I've sung standards and done some classical type, music. And I understand the difference in feel between singing jazz, singing rock and roll, singing country, all the different styles. But it's interesting to me that you say that when you were doing it, it didn't feel like you were singing. Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's almost like you're acting. I'm acting like a person who never took voice lessons, and I'm another character, which gets into another thing about singing and acting. They're so important. The acting is so important to get the message across. To understand the message yourself and give it to the audience. Actually, I'm doing that now in church. That's where
Yes.
I play piano and I sing the mass, or I may just cantor. Somebody else is playing, and you want to get the message of the words. It's doing it again.
Busy day in heaven, people. So enjoy it. That's fine. Don't even worry about it.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and so we talk a lot. You and I talk a lot, off and on, about spirituality, religion, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our places where we agree and converge, and places where we maybe don't agree. But one thing I think that I don't necessarily voice as much is that singing music of any kind, if done in a certain way, can be a very spiritual experience. And you kind of said that, right? Absolutely. And part of that came from certainly growing up in a household with you. It also came from growing up at a time where I was born and raised Catholic, going to a church where secular style music was being allowed in more, and the acoustic guitar, right, things like that. And to kind of, gospel music was a huge influence on soul music and on other kinds of rock and roll music and things like that. And so I think that there's often this kind of false wall between secular music and religious music that has always been kind of off-putting to me. And anybody who watches me knows that my whole thing is music is not a genre. The
right,
walls and distinctions and barriers and things like that don't really exist. We just create labels to make it more convenient. And, part of my upbringing, certainly, and your influence, and just kind of, knowing enough about history and the types of music there are, it makes it easy to see that there doesn't need to be that kind of distinction. That if you're listening, for example, I'm a big U2 fan, and the first time I ever saw them in concert was an absolutely spiritual experience, right? Wow. And regardless of whether they were singing one of their more religious-based songs or most of what they sing, which is not necessarily that, it had that feeling to it. It was uplifting. You could feel the tingling and all the things that go on. I don't see why that needs to be any different in terms of experience than, something like you're doing now, which is donating, or well, not donating, but you are giving your skills, your talent, to the church in the ways that you do, and enhancing the mass and inspiring the people there. And to me, it's different venues, certainly in many ways different content, but the same result.
Same result. I don't get paid for singing. The singing is a give back
Right.
to the church. I do get paid for playing the piano. Comes back to Tony Mambo again, telling my mom and dad that I should take piano lessons. And from that, I started giving you lessons, I think, when you were about 5 or something. But yeah, the influences are there, and getting the message across is more important maybe than we even realize. More important.
And that's something we're going to keep touching on, I think, in this interview. I want to just so everyone knows what I thought might happen. This is going to be a two-parter, and I know that you in particular, Dad, hate cliffhangers, but I'm sorry to everyone there. We're going to have to split this up because it's going to be too much good stuff. But to kind of put a little bow on this first part, can you give me a little more of your experience from, say, 61 to 70, starting with the rock and roll tours that you were on, some of the interesting facts about those, and then how that morphed, and or coincided with or conflicted with the other kinds of singing you were doing during that period?
Yeah, when I was on the Children's Hour, uh, one of the main directors of the show was a gentleman named Merrill Brockway. Um, I started making records again in '57 after the Arthur Godfrey show. There are a whole lot of records out there, singles, 45s of me. And my record career, by the time 1961 rolled around, it had peaked, if you will. I'll talk about that rock and roll tour later. But Merrill Brockway suggested, why don't you go to college? I said, what do you mean college? What do I need college for? And I'm a singer. There again, we're talking about a kind of a stupid, naive South Philly guy. But anyway, I enrolled at LaSalle College, September of '61. Again, I stayed there 5 years because you needed 132 hours to graduate, and I wanted to keep my index up. I was a little competitive, my grade point average. And I was working nightclubs, singing, staying out late, and so forth. And there I was. But yeah, LaSalle College intervened, as it were, for 5 years. I was in the plays, I was in the musicals. So by '66, I had met some. In '64, I met this beautiful blonde. Her name was Julie, and I met her in the summer of '64. And by '66, I think realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. And by the fall of '66, I proposed, and we were married in '67. And the rest is history, as the cliche goes. And you're part of that history, and your brother Dave.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So college really kind of shifted what you were doing at the time. But before we get to that, can you just touch a little bit more on the what happened before then, the rock and roll tours?
Yeah, that tour was 1960. It was a bus tour, 31 nighters, as they say. We slept on the bus, all of us, most of the time. Occasionally, we went to a hotel. Of the 31 nighters, we probably slept in a hotel 6 or 7 nights. The rest we slept on the bus. The interesting thing was that particular tour started in Chicago. went throughout the Midwest, up into Canada a little bit. A year earlier, the exact same tour was taken by Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Richie Valens, and Dion and the Belmonts. Uh, they left, it was a Tuesday morning, Clear Lake, Iowa. You leave Clear Lake, Iowa, and you go to North Dakota. Well, Buddy Holly had enough money to be able to rent a little plane to go to North Dakota. It was about a 400-mile. And everybody knows they were saying bye, bye, Miss American Pie. The day the music died.
Yep.
February the 3rd, 1959, Tuesday morning. And
So a year later, oh, go ahead.
Dion was almost on that bus. Dion and the Belmonts. They were on, but Dion was offered a seat on the bus for $39. The plane. I'm sorry, the plane. $39. And Dion said basically said to Buddy Holly, I can't see myself spending $39 for a plane ride, which is how much my mom and dad spend for a monthly rent.
Oh man.
In the Bronx.
Yeah. We saw him a couple
you did?
Late 2019, I want to say. Took kids to this show, and he was one of the featured singers.
How about that?
He's still out there doing his stuff too.
Yes, he's about, I think he's in his mid-80s now. Dion
okay.
DeMatteo, somewhere in that area.
Yeah, another damn Italian.
Yeah.
So you did the same exact tour for the
a year later, yeah.
Balance, Big Bopper, Buddy Holly, and then was that it? No, because I know you also went to South America too, right?
Oh, that didn't happen until the 1965. I was working the Jockey Club in 1964 for the summer, and doing a stand-up singing.
And that is where, for people who don't know,
the Jockey Club is in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Was that near or similar to the 500 Club?
The 500 Club was above the Jockey Club in terms of reputation, because it's the only club on the Eastern Seaboard that Frank Sinatra would work at the time.
And wasn't there a story there?
There is, yeah.
Yeah,
I worked two summers at the 500 Club, summer 58 and the summer 59.
Right.
And that was a wonderful experience. I always say it was baptism under fire is what it was. You worked the front room of the 500 Club. It was just wonderful. In one corner, Joe DiMaggio would be sitting there,
Wow.
There were other people.
I've seen some of the pictures. Yeah. Milton Berle.
Sure.
And
Milton Berle, right.
But then weren't you bumped at some point, or what happened there? Didn't they say you couldn't sing or something like that?
Oh, no, only when Sinatra was coming to the 500 Club, Nicky DeMatteo, the owner of the Five, told Tony, my manager, look, when Frank is here, I don't want Nicky singing. It had nothing to do with me being a competition for Sinatra. What it was, you don't want two singers or, that sort of thing. And I understood that.
Okay.
It was a wonderful experience. Just, I get to see Sinatra close up,
Yeah.
I got to meet Sammy Davis. Did not meet Sinatra, but Sammy Davis, Vic Damone. Yeah.
That's amazing. All these people. Yeah. So let's go back to 65, then the Jockey Club.
Okay. At 64, the Jockey Club.
64.
One of the performers was from South America, and her friend was an agent. Lena Grun was her name, and Lena booked me into South America for about 7 weeks for the summer of 65. And so I spent 3 weeks in Lima, Peru, and 4 weeks in Buenos Aires. And that was a wonderful experience as well.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say is what's amazing to me is then here I am putting out all of my music and, trying to stay as socially connected as possible, as everybody does. And a couple of years ago, I stumbled on a woman from Argentina.
Oh my.
And she asked me if I was related to you.
No kidding.
And it turns out that she was a huge, huge fan of yours and still has some of your materials and things
Is
like
that
that.
right?
And her daughter is connected with me and by
Um,
extension with you.
That's the first time I'm hearing that.
Yeah, her
That
name
is
is,
great.
well, first name is Sylvia, and interestingly enough, an Italian, but born and raised in Argentina.
In Argentina.
So
Oh,
actually, a lot of Italians down in South America.
wow. Absolutely.
Uh, yeah, and that's not the first time that's happened. There have been several times where someone has seen my name and said, "Are you related to this Nicky DeMatteo?" And for some reason, other than Philly people and people we might know,
Sure.
just a few times removed, for some reason the it's that South American connection that seems to be the one that pops up the most.
I actually met cousins in South America
Ah,
because my father's sister, one of his sisters, settled in Montevideo, Uruguay. And of course, that's close to Argentina. And they saw me on television. They're cousins. The world gets smaller as I get older.
yeah. Oh, wow. That's incredible. Yeah. Well, and,
Super.
and I just a weird, side thing. I bumped into cousins online a few years ago who still live they live in Naples.
Oh,
And
really?
they run a boutique. They have their own fashion line and everything like that. And so now Catherine and I have connected our
Oh,
fashion, apparel company, Snark Shirts by
isn't
Pete,
that great?
with them. And it's just this weird kind of full circle thing.
It's
And
it's
you
great.
never know where you're going to find family related or not. So, all right. So then you did this Argentina thing. You graduated college in '66, but you were still recording during that period or not?
Yeah, I was. I guess my last professional recordings, as it were the singles, I should say, were around 66 or so. And that was it. I recorded something called "I Want to Be Lonely." Woo! Yeah, in '66.
Then what happened from, let's say, because you mark your stand-up singing through 1970. What happened between
Right.
66 and 70?
In '67, I married this beautiful Hungarian person.
I don't know who you're. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, we're still married. Yeah, we are.
Wow. So the rest of your life, things going well so far. That's good.
Yeah. I'll say amen to that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
67, we married. I still I was working clubs. I was doing what we call club dates, where you just go into a hotel and you do a show for people and, with a house band, and that's fine. And that's
Hmm.
what I was doing, uh, 67 to 70. 1970, I'm hired to work a place in Atlantic City called Pal Joey's, run by a former fighter named Joey Falco. And he hired me for the summer, but in the spring I started working for him. And in the spring, he fired the band. And, you know, your mom and I were out there. You weren't quite too. We had rented a place for the summer. And she said, "Why don't you just tell Joey you play the piano?" I said, "I don't want to do that." We had no choice. I had just bought this. In fact, I see it behind you, the custom speakers and the custom sound system. Yeah, the blue.
Wow.
Just bought that
Now I know how old they are. Okay.
with money I borrowed from my mom. And so I went to Joey and said, "Joey, I play the piano." He said, "Okay, sure." And talk about the phrase, "The rest is history." I mean, I was playing and singing there, and somebody from Philadelphia Magazine, very popular magazine in the Philadelphia area, came and saw me there, gave me, well, they were doing an article on Atlantic City, and they gave me this wonderful, wonderful review. Well, people started flocking in, and one thing led to another, and then I've been playing and singing at the piano ever since.
Great place to stop because
Okay.
we're gonna call that part one, people. And next week you're gonna get to see part two, which of
Oh,
course behind the scenes means we're just gonna take a a bathroom break and continue here.
Amen.
But I have a couple of questions about that period, the very late 60s
Sure.
and 1970, and that will help us kick off the part two of this interview. So for those of you who for some reason have no desire to see part two, which is crazy to me, but I will say as always, I mean, thank you to my guest, Nicky DeMatteo.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you for listening and watching and subscribing and clicking and sharing and paying your dues and donating and being a Patreon supporter. And tune in next week for part two.